The aroma of brewing coffee, Sarah's favorite blend, always seemed to hug our little kitchen on Willow Creek Lane. This morning was no different. Sunlight, still soft around the edges, streamed through the window above the sink, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the golden rays. Sarah hummed a tuneless melody as she moved around, her bare feet padding softly on the worn linoleum. It was a sound I'd grown to cherish over the years, a simple soundtrack to our peaceful existence. Later, out in the small patch we laughingly called our garden, the air was cool and damp. Sarah knelt by the rose bushes, her brow furrowed in concentration as she snipped away dead blooms. I watched her from the porch swing, the gentle creaking a familiar rhythm in the quiet afternoon. She had a way with those roses, coaxing vibrant colors and delicate scents from thorny stems, just like she had a way of smoothing the edges of my own, sometimes prickly nature. "They need a bit more water, I think," she called over, her voice light. "I'll get the hose," I replied, pushing myself up from the swing. As I walked towards the shed, a fleeting image flickered in my mind. The harsh spray of a fire hose against a barricade, the shouts and the tension. It was a memory from a long time ago, a life I rarely thought about anymore. The image vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the familiar scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. This was my reality now, this quiet street, this loving woman, this simple life. Sarah stood up, wiping her hands on her gardening gloves, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "Did you remember we need eggs from Miller's?" she asked. "They always sell out so fast on Saturdays." "Already on the list," I assured her, tapping my pocket. "And I was thinking we could try that new bakery downtown later. Mrs. Henderson said their sourdough is amazing." Her face lit up. "Oh, I'd love that. It's been ages since we've had a proper day out." These were the moments that filled our days, the small, ordinary joys that wove together the fabric of our life on Willow Creek Lane. The friendly wave from old Mr. Abernathy as he walked his beagle, the laughter of children playing hopscotch down the street, the comforting predictability of our routines. It was a world we had carefully built, a sanctuary of peace and quiet contentment. Sarah, with her unwavering optimism and her gentle spirit, was the heart of it all. Her easy laughter, the way she could find beauty in the smallest things, her unwavering support, these were the anchors of my life. Later that afternoon, as the shadows began to lengthen across the lawn, a subtle shift occurred. A car drove by a little too fast, its engine a brief snarl that broke the usual calm. It was gone quickly, and we didn't think much of it at the time. But looking back, it feels like a tiny crack appearing in a pane of glass, a barely perceptible tremor before the earthquake. The air, usually still and peaceful, seemed to hold a faint, almost imperceptible tension, a silent whisper of the storm that was about to break. The screech of tires ripped through the afternoon quiet, a sound so jarring it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't the usual squeal of a teenager showing off. This was a sound of urgency, of violence. A black SUV, huge and imposing, slammed to a halt at the edge of our driveway, blocking any escape. Before I could even process what was happening, the doors flew open and figures in black gear spilled out. "Police! Everyone on the ground!" The shouts were sharp, amplified, echoing down Willow Creek Lane. They weren't voices of peacekeepers. They were commands, delivered with an edge of aggression I'd never heard on our street. These weren't the familiar faces of the local patrol officers who occasionally drove by with a friendly wave. These were masked figures, their faces obscured by helmets and shields, their bodies encased in tactical armor. Weapons were raised, pointed. Not casually, not as a precaution, but with a directness that sent a jolt of fear through me. Rifles, large and menacing, were aimed at the house, at the garden, at me. The sunlight, which had been so gentle just moments before, now seemed to glint off the cold metal, turning the scene into something out of a nightmare. "There's some mistake," I started to say, my voice barely a whisper against the amplified shouts. But the barrel of a rifle, inches from my face, silenced me. It wasn't a request, it was an order. I lowered myself to the ground, the rough concrete biting into my cheek. The world tilted, the familiar landscape of our front yard transformed into a hostile territory. Boots surrounded me, heavy and purposeful. The air filled with the static crackle of radios, the clipped urgent commands of the officers. I could feel the vibrations of their movements through the concrete, the sense of controlled chaos that emanated from them. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that had suddenly descended upon our peaceful street. "Secure the house!" one voice barked, the words echoing with a chilling finality. I heard the sound of a door being forced open, the splintering of wood, and the heavy thud of boots inside our home. Our sanctuary, the place where we felt safe and secure, was now under siege. Then I saw her. Sarah's car, our old sedan, turned the corner and pulled into the driveway. She stepped out, grocery bags clutched in both arms, her face a mask of confusion. The paper bags, filled with the simple ingredients of our evening meal, looked absurdly fragile against the backdrop of this heavily armed invasion. "Roy, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. 3 officers immediately pivoted, their weapons trained on her. Not on a fleeing suspect, not on a dangerous criminal, but on my wife, a 65-year-old woman carrying groceries. "Drop the bags. Hands where we can see them." The commands were sharp, unwavering. Sarah froze, the paper bags pressed against her chest. "Please, she began, her voice barely audible above the shouts. "She's not complying." A younger officer's voice cracked, high-pitched with adrenaline. It was a voice that betrayed fear, not authority. "Ma'am, final warning." Sarah began to lower the bags, her movements slow and hesitant. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis, fumbled with the paper, the fragile containers threatening to tear. She wasn't resisting, she was struggling. "Roy," I yelled, my voice raw with desperation. "She's my wife. She's just carrying groceries." A boot pressed harder against my back, forcing my face further into the rough concrete. "Step back, old man, or you're next." The voice was cold, devoid of any humanity. The words were a warning, a threat, a prelude to the violence that followed. The buzzing sound filled the air, a high-pitched whine that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the sound of a taser, a weapon designed to incapacitate, to inflict pain. I watched, helpless, as the prongs arced towards Sarah, 2 tiny points of light against the chaos of the scene. Then the world seemed to slow down. Sarah's body convulsed, her muscles contracting violently as electricity surged through her. The grocery bags ripped open, their contents exploding across the driveway. Eggs shattered, their yolks oozing across the concrete. Apples rolled, bouncing and scattering beneath the heavy boots of the officers. Milk splashed, a white stain spreading across the dark asphalt. Sarah collapsed. Not gracefully, not dramatically, but like a marionette with its strings cut. Her body crumpled to the ground, her limbs twisted at unnatural angles. The image is seared into my memory, a grotesque tableau of violence and vulnerability. The buzzing stopped, but the silence that followed was even more deafening. It was a silence filled with the echoes of violence, the unspoken accusation, the weight of what had just happened. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal rage that threatened to overwhelm me. But beneath the anger, a cold, clear focus settled in my mind. This wasn't the time for panic. This was the time for something else. My cheek was pressed against the rough, unforgiving concrete, the scent of spilled milk and shattered eggs mingling with the acrid tang of the taser. Sarah lay motionless a few feet away, the image of her body contorting still burned behind my eyelids. But amidst the chaos and the fear, a different part of me took over, a part that had been dormant for years, a part that knew how to operate in the face of extreme pressure. My mind, usually occupied with the quiet rhythms of our life on Willow Creek Lane, suddenly snapped into a different mode. Details, long buried, resurfaced with startling clarity. The feel of a specific grip on a weapon, the precise weight of a pack on my back, the coded language of a world far removed from rose bushes and grocery lists. I remembered a briefing room years ago, the air thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee, a map spread out on a table, marked with lines and symbols that represented danger and uncertainty. My voice, calm and steady, outlining a plan, anticipating every possible contingency. I remembered the faces of the men beside me, their eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. There were missions, of course, missions that never made the news, operations that existed only in classified files and whispered conversations, places where the rules were different, where survival depended on instinct and precision. I remembered the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that lives depended on my decisions. And there were people, faces I hadn't thought of in years, names that brought a sharp pang of memory, men and women who operated in the shadows, who moved with a quiet efficiency that belied their lethal capabilities. Connections built on trust and shared experience that ran deep beneath the surface of the ordinary world. This wasn't about anger or revenge, it was about accessing that hidden network, that reservoir of knowledge and authority that I knew was still there. It was about leveraging a past that these officers, in their rigid uniforms and their adrenaline-fueled aggression, couldn't even begin to comprehend. The 5 words formed in my mind, not as a threat, but as a key. A key that could unlock a different reality, a reality where the rules were different, where respect was earned, not demanded. A reality where the consequences of their actions would become terrifyingly clear. The words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the shouted commands and the crackling static of the radios. "Call General Rohr right now." My voice, though quiet, cut through the tension like a blade. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't a demand. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a calm authority that even I hadn't realized I still possessed. All movement ceased. The heavy boots that had been circling me stopped their relentless pacing. The officers, who had been so focused on their tactical maneuvers, suddenly froze, their weapons still aimed, but their bodies rigid with uncertainty. The commanding officer, the one with the insignia on his vest, blinked, his face momentarily blank. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The energy in the driveway, which had been so charged with aggression, shifted into something else. Confusion, doubt, a flicker of something akin to fear. The officer's eyes, visible above his mask, darted from me to his team, searching for guidance, for an explanation. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The only sound was the faint hum of the vehicles, a reminder of the power that had been unleashed, and now, abruptly, held in check. The officers, who had seemed so unified in their purpose just moments before, now stood divided by a single, unspoken question. Who was this man? I held the commanding officer's gaze, my expression unwavering. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make any further demands. I simply waited, allowing the weight of those 5 words to sink in. They weren't just a name. They represented a level of authority, a network of connections, a world that existed beyond their immediate understanding. The effect was immediate and undeniable. The officers, who had been so quick to use force, were now hesitant, unsure of their next move. The bravado that had characterized their arrival had vanished, replaced by a palpable sense of unease. The 5 words had pierced their armor, revealing a vulnerability they hadn't expected to encounter. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant hum of the idling vehicles. A hushed conversation began among the officers, their voices low and urgent, barely audible above the ringing in my ears. The commanding officer, his face now etched with a grim uncertainty, barked a clipped order into his radio. Words I couldn't quite decipher, but the tone was unmistakable. A frantic search for information, a desperate attempt to understand the situation they had stumbled into. They were checking, I knew, running my name, cross-referencing databases, trying to piece together the fragments of a past they were never meant to see. The air crackled with the unspoken tension, the realization dawning on them that this wasn't a routine operation, that they had stepped into something far more complex and dangerous than they had anticipated. My focus remained on Sarah. The paramedics had arrived, their movements swift and efficient, their faces tight with concern. They worked quickly, assessing her condition, their voices low and professional. I watched, my heart a clenched fist, the image of her body convulsing still fresh in my mind. The commanding officer, his earlier aggression replaced by a strained composure, approached me. His eyes, though hidden behind his mask, betrayed a flicker of something close to apprehension. He spoke, his voice low and measured, the bravado of earlier replaced by a cautious respect. "We're verifying your claim," he said, the word hanging in the air like a question. He didn't meet my gaze directly, his attention split between me, the paramedics, and the hushed activity of his team. The verification came swiftly. A voice crackled from the radio, the words distorted but the impact undeniable. I saw the color drain from the commanding officer's face, his posture stiffening as the weight of the information settled upon him. The realization dawned on him and on his team that they had made a catastrophic error. The radio chatter ceased, replaced by an almost unnerving quiet. The paramedics continued their work, their movements focused and deliberate, a small island of calm amidst the chaos. The commanding officer, his face now a mask of grim realization, gave a series of clipped orders. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable, a stark contrast to the earlier aggressive commands. "Secure the perimeter," he barked, but the words lacked their previous authority. The officers moved, but their movements were less forceful, their weapons held at a lower angle. The swagger that had characterized their arrival had vanished, replaced by a subdued, almost sheepish demeanor. He turned to me, his helmet now removed, revealing a face pale and drawn. "Sir, we had intelligence that—" He trailed off, the words sounding hollow and inadequate. There were no excuses that could justify what had happened. My gaze remained fixed on him, my expression unyielding. I didn't interrupt, didn't offer any words of comfort or understanding. There was nothing to say. The sight of Sarah, still recovering, her face pale and drawn, spoke volumes. He tried again, his voice barely a whisper. I apologize. This was a mistake. A terrible mistake." The words hung in the air, hollow and insufficient. They couldn't undo the pain, the shock, the violation of our home and our lives. The other officers, their faces now visible, shifted uneasily. Some looked down, their eyes avoiding mine. Others stared straight ahead, their expressions blank, their earlier confidence shattered. The weight of their actions, the consequences of their overreach, pressed down on them. The ambulance pulled away, its siren a muted wail in the afternoon calm. Sarah was inside, her hand resting in mine, her eyes closed. The paramedics had assured me she would be all right, but the tremor in her touch told a different story. The drive home was a blur, the familiar streets of Willow Creek Lane now tainted with the memory of violence. Inside, the house felt different. The forced entry, the splintered door frame, the overturned furniture, it was a violation, a stark reminder that our sanctuary had been breached. Sarah lay on the sofa, her face pale against the soft cushions. An ice pack rested on her chest, a futile attempt to soothe the pain where the taser prongs had struck. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional soft sigh from Sarah. The adrenaline that had kept me focused during the confrontation was beginning to ebb, replaced by a weary ache. I sat beside her, my hand covering hers, the warmth of her skin a small comfort in the cold aftermath. The phone rang, its shrill tone jarring in the stillness. I hesitated, then answered it. The voice on the other end was familiar, a voice from a life I thought I had left behind. It was him, the one whose name had stopped the SWAT team in their tracks. His voice was low, concerned. He had heard about what happened, the details relayed through channels I couldn't even begin to explain to Sarah. There were words of apology, of course, but also something else. A subtle undercurrent of something unspoken, a hint of future involvement, of consequences yet to unfold. He offered help, resources, access to a world I had deliberately distanced myself from, a world of power and influence, of secrets and shadows. It was a world that could make this right, but also a world that came with its own set of dangers and obligations. The days that followed were a strange mix of quiet and unease. Willow Creek Lane, once a haven of tranquility, now felt different. The friendly waves from neighbors carried an extra layer of concern, their eyes lingering on Sarah and me, searching for signs of recovery. The usual rhythm of our lives was disrupted, the normalcy replaced by a lingering sense of vulnerability. The news spread quickly, of course. Not the whole truth, not the classified details that had brought the SWAT team to our door, but enough to paint a picture of a violent intrusion, a shocking display of force against innocent civilians. The community rallied around us, offering support, bringing meals, their voices a mix of outrage and disbelief. The official response was carefully worded, a delicate dance between acknowledging the incident and minimizing its severity. There were internal investigations, promises of reform, carefully crafted statements about procedural errors and the need for better training. But the words felt hollow, a bureaucratic attempt to smooth over a deep and festering wound. There were attempts to control the narrative, to paint the SWAT team as well-intentioned officers who had simply made a mistake. But the truth, as it often does, had a way of seeping through the cracks. The whispers grew louder, the questions more insistent. How could such a thing happen? What were they really looking for? And who was this man, this ordinary neighbor, who could command such immediate and unquestioning obedience? The weeks turned into months. We tried to rebuild our lives, to reclaim the peace that had been so violently shattered. Sarah healed, slowly but surely, the physical scars fading, but the emotional ones lingering beneath the surface. The nightmares came, less frequent now, but still a dark reminder of the day our world turned upside down. We returned to our routines, the familiar rhythms of our days, a fragile comfort. The garden, once the scene of terror, became a place of healing, a shared project where we planted new roses, their vibrant colors a symbol of resilience and hope. The laughter returned, softer now, more precious, a reminder of the joy that could still be found amidst the shadows. But things were different. The trust, once so absolute, was now tinged with a cautious awareness. The world outside Willow Creek Lane felt less safe, less predictable. We learned that even in the quietest corners of our lives, the echoes of a larger, more dangerous reality could intrude without warning. And the 5 words. They hung in the air, a constant reminder of the power that lay dormant within me, a power I had chosen to leave behind, but that had been forced to resurface in a moment of crisis. They were a testament to the fact that even in the face of overwhelming force, a calm voice backed by truth could still prevail. The experience changed us, irrevocably. It taught us about the fragility of peace, the enduring strength of love, and the unexpected power that can arise when we are pushed to our limits. It was a dark chapter in our lives, but it was also a reminder that even in the aftermath of violence, hope and healing can still find a way to bloom.